Welcome back to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, I have Hannibal Tabu. It's going to be a fun talk, but before I talk to him, I'm going to talk to you about starting your own podcast or creating your own digital media. If you want to do that, go to getagripstudios.com, baby. That's getagripstudios.com. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Life podcast, Hannibal.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Good. You know what's interesting? I actually have been to Rockford, Illinois.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry for you. It's rough. Me and Cheap Trick are probably the only things that came out of town that anybody remembers.
Well, you know what's funny about it? I was just traveling around doing sales, and I ended up in Rockford. Then I saw your profile here. I'm like, Rockford. Interesting. I mean, how many people would start off saying, "Yeah, I've been to Rockford too." So, what haven't you done, Hannibal? I mean, this is a career here. This is a career, man.
I try to stay busy, yes, sir. I've done a wide number of things in a large number of disciplines, so I've tried to keep busy because for me, it's all basically the same thing. It's about conveying a message. That message being getting a thought from one person to the next and making sure it connects and making sure it's understood and comprehended. That's really what everything I've done in my career has been about. So for me, it's all kind of the same thing. It's just, people see it differently.
You know, it's funny because I look at your bio here and I see so many different things moving, lots of different companies, like, name recognizable companies that most people would know. I see show business, exciting. I'm wondering, are you that multifaceted, or do you just get bored a little bit, Hannibal, and you want to try something? You want to try your message out in a new medium? Is that what it is?
Why not both? There's definitely elements of both in that regard because one of the things, the industry has changed a lot with both the digital revolution and a lot of things that has happened. So if I said, "Oh well, I'm a journalist and this is all I'm going to do," I would be broke now. And if I said, "Oh well, if I've got this writing thing going on in because I did a lot of poetry and all I'm going to do is poetry," then I'd be broke. So I follow the market and I follow my interests. And one of my friends says all of my hobbies end up making me money. So, it's like I started working in, for example, poetry, coming out of college. And then all of a sudden I'm in all these anthologies, or I start talking about, oh, well, maybe we'll start doing comic book reviews with some of my friends. And then all of a sudden I'm getting paid for it. And these sort of things are a natural progression that come from both high quality work and from being ready when an opportunity is presented.
So that's interesting because that's what an entrepreneur does.
I believe so. Yes, sir.
Right? It's like, you gauge in something. So there's people out there that are hobbyists, and there's nothing wrong with hobbies. But the problem with hobbies is they take your time and your money, and the fulfillment comes from the passing of time at something in which you become better at. Is that fair? Right?
I would agree that, yeah.
But a professional says, okay, but I want to get paid.
Yes. I do have I grew up in Memphis. I was born in Rockford, but I grew up in Memphis, and there's the hustler mentality is not very far from many people there. So I grew up with the idea of enjoying myself, but still making sure that it was going to be taking care of business at the end of the day. And that's what I've really had to do. I saw opportunities like, well, I see this happening and you need this and I can do this. So you may as well just pay me for it. And lots of times people went, yeah, okay, that checks out.
I think a lot of people want to pay for stuff. It's like, if you don't pay for something, it has no value by definition.
It's also more convenient a lot of times. And this is one of the things that Apple would capitalize on this. It's like, we could let you figure out how to go to Napster and download things, yada, yada. Or you could just pay me $1 for this song that you want right now. It's like, well, it's only $1. All right, I'll pay for that right now and I'll get it. And now they've got a multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar business model built upon that did not exist, a few decades ago.
Oh, for sure. And if I ask you about how you go about the conversation, because a lot of people don't know how to ask for money. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? They don't know how to have those conversations. And if somebody's listening to you to this, and you're an experienced businessman, how does that you so you're recognizing a trend? Like let's talk about Rap Pages or America Online or
Hmm.
the Los Angeles Sentinel or
Hmm.
Spinner Rack, Speak, The Source, all these great magazines that you were a journalist for, some of which I
Hmm.
think are no longer around. Um,
Many of which are not, no longer.
right. How is it that you notice that, for example, that a magazine wants content, you have a message. How does that conversation start? Is it just connections in the business? Everybody knows Hannibal Tabu, or what is it?
It starts with connections where it's, it starts with connections. So, with, for example, Rap Pages, I was working as an intern at the Los Angeles Sentinel, which is a job I got out of college. And my editor there was an editor at Rap Pages, and she loved my work ethic. She saw that she would give me an assignment, and I would knock it out, and there would never be any problem. And that sort of reliability was valuable to her. So
Mm.
when she's talking to her friend Sheena Lester, who was the editor at Rap Pages at the time, who was like, "Oh, these freelancers are always disappearing on me," she was like, "You need Hannibal. Hannibal's never disappearing. Hannibal's always showing up on time." Sheena's like, "Let me give him a try." I come in again, knock it out of the park, boom, boom, boom. So it's getting to know the right people and getting to have the right access to things as well. But it's also being reliable and being dependable when you show up to do something. And but more importantly for me, when I'm starting a fresh conversation with somebody, it's about making sure that I propose something to them that is a win-win for both of us. So
Mm.
if I
Interesting.
if I say, for example, Aspen Comics is a perfect example. They had all these characters and they had all this legacy, and I said, well, hey, I'm a fairly smart guy, and I have no idea what these characters are about. If you had a single guidebook that explained all the characters to people, you could sell that pretty much forever, and
Mm.
then people could have a jumping on point for your characters. And they're like, that is a good idea. Here, have some money, and off we work.
Interesting. So when you're having these conversations, you're actually putting yourself into the other person's shoes in terms of
Hmm.
recognizing a need that they have, and then
Hmm.
just outlining that you can fill that need.
Yes, sir.
And then when you're done that, you behave like a professional.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Like that sounds like a pretty easy recipe for success.
The recipe is easy. The making the recipe is not. There's a lot of sleepless nights. My wife is like, "Would you please just go to bed?" So, yeah, there's a lot of uphill grind in terms of actually doing the work. Being a professional is uh, a level of effort that unfortunately many people don't elevate themselves to.
Yes, I agree with
But
you.
if you're willing to
It's a
push,
choice. It's a
it's
choice.
yeah, it's a choice, but it's a craft. It can be developed. Anybody, talent, they say you can't teach talent or you can't teach quickness. But what you can teach is a work ethic. You can
Sure.
learn, oh, if I do this in a repeatable, professional, clean way, then I can get the
Mm.
same results. That's almost a scientific approach to it. And if you do that, then yeah, like I said, the recipe itself is not very difficult. Just you have to keep pushing it. It's not something where you can oh, what's the line? There's one of my favorite lines like, the sun doesn't take any days off, so why am I going to take a day off?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what's interesting about that too. Like, so I'm 5'6.5", 7'5", whatever. I'm not going to be a
Hmm.
center in the NBA. So,
True.
like, no matter how hard I try, I'm not. That's never going to happen. But
Hmm.
if you're realistic in what you're trying to achieve, so if somebody takes a look and says, you know what, I want to, I want to be a poet. Well,
Hmm.
guess what? You can't sit down the next day and be a poet. You have to work at
True.
the craft for a long
Hmm.
time. I actually think that if somebody's attracted to that art, there's going to be some natural talent there they're going to have, but they're going to have to work at it for a long time. Music is another example of this. Like
Hmm.
the overnight star was 5 years in the making.
Hmm.
And you see this all over and over again. You find out that a musician or whoever actually spent their entire childhood learning different instruments, but then it just seemed like they came out of nowhere and were amazing. Um, when you're, I want to talk to you a little bit about some of these large corporations that you worked for.
Hmm. Okay.
Were they contract positions? Did you take on a project for them?
Different ones with different contract. I know Quicken.com was like they needed somebody who knew HTML to come in and knock something out. That
Mm.
either somebody was there before and screwed it up. I don't know. If people didn't screw up things, I would never get paid. But I came in for a 1 day thing, knocked it out, never had any problems with it, and moved on and forgot about it. It was a real gunslinger situation. On the other hand, when I was at, say, for instance, Kaiser Permanente, that was like a full-time job. I was there. I had benefits. I went on company retreats. I did all kind of shenanigans
Mm.
like that. So what what I always did for myself was I made myself available and in a way that was clear. I worked with an agency that's now called Aquint. That's I think they're an international company. And back when I was with them at first, they were called Mac Temps and Web Staff because we were all new digital stuff, fancy.
Mm.
Uh, and they would find people who had, as they say, a particular set of skills, and they would offer them to companies. So they would be the bad guy and asking for money, so I didn't have to. I would
Mm.
just show up, be amazing, and get paid, and call it a day. Uh, that was both contract and employee work. I was happy to do both. I was uh, like Sam Jackson. There's not very many checks I've turned down thus far. Uh, and it seemed to I'm comfortable in those environments because a lot of times people get in those environments and the meetings and the stress and so on and so forth. Even the most stressful thing I was at was Disney Channel, which like people were like literally one of my coworkers, he every day he went to lunch and had 2 martinis. And he says, I've been here for 2 years and by next year it'll be 3 martinis because that's what he had to do to get through every day.
Right.
But in those environments, it's just about finding the vulnerabilities, finding, okay, where's the need? Where is this happening? What's going
Mm.
on that needs to happen? And that can go well. Disney Channel, for example, I was on a Tuesday morning, the business channel, because we were the business vice president, the vice president of the whole business unit, called me up on a conference call in front of like 8,000 people in 9 cities. Says, this is Hannibal. Hannibal got us back on time with this redesign that had been stalled for a year. Even when we gave him a content management system at the last minute, he didn't even blink, and we're still online and we're still on time. That was Tuesday. Thursday, her boss, Michael Eisner, sent out an email. 6,000 of y'all got to go worldwide. I was number 8 on Friday. My boss was number 10 on Monday. And that had nothing to do with our work. It was just numbers.
Wow. Wow. Whew. So, as a poet, I studied English lit pretty substantially in university, and I've always been interested in poetry. What is the theme of your poetry?
What I saw my poetry as was taking the light of the world and shining it through a very specific prism. So if you take a prism and shine it in front of a flashlight, you'll see a different thing than if you shine it in front of a black light, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a very specific set of perspectives based upon my upbringing, based upon my cultural background, based upon details of and idiosyncrasies of my own personality. And that perspective presents a different way to look at things. And my poetry did a lot of that. So, for example, I remember one of my favorite poems. The opening line was, "Over the last 20 years, I've had a series of apocalyptic dreams. Some of them went on to become president." Uh,
Mm.
and
Mm.
and that sort of perspective is not what you would get from, say, for instance, some of my classmates at USC in the poetry program. Not what you would even get from some of the people who worked with me at the World Stage and Nancy Writers Workshop in Leimert Park. I had a very specific blending of influences that creates a specific perspective.
What is your background?
Well, I grew up in Memphis, as I said.
Mm-hmm.
I come from an exciting family. My sisters, because they work in government, have asked me not to go into too many details about our dad. But I come from an exciting family that didn't exactly mesh very well. So I was raised by my great aunt and uncle. They had grown up in the Depression. They had grown up under segregation. They had grown up in significantly harder times than I will ever see.
Mm-hmm.
And they conveyed the idea of hard work and of ownership and of getting things done, even in the face of overwhelming opposition.
Sure.
And that was really, built into my DNA at a very early age. However, also built into that was in 1977, my mother, in one of the last things we did together before went with my great aunt and uncle, took me to go see Star Wars in theaters 40 times because we were really into it.
Sure.
And the possibility of being stuck in some podunk nowhere place and then going off and finding, as they say, a larger world was enormously seductive to me. So those twin influences have driven a lot of the things I've done in my life.
Are you familiar with Langston Hughes?
Quite, yes, sir.
Is he the greatest African American poet?
Poet. Is he the greatest African American poet? That's a tough fight to win. I'm doing the Sweet 16 bracket in my head now.
Sure. Because he was a jazz musician, but they take his jazz lyrics. I studied his jazz lyrics, and they actually take his jazz lyrics and they read it as poetry. And then he wrote that poem. And excuse me, I'm not using words that I'm using Langston's words. The Negro Speaks of Rivers. That is such a wonderful poem. It could be one of the greatest poems I've ever read in my life. And
he's in the Elite Eight. Wow. Okay, that's a good question. Huh.
There's not a lot of people that would know Langston Hughes, unfortunately. If you say that, he's not a household name, but certainly one of the greats of all time. How do you? So your great aunt and uncle experienced the Jim Crow law.
Absolutely.
And then in their lifetime, they went through the transition of Jim Crow to no Jim Crow. What message would they have to us today?
The message that they would have, particularly my great uncle. My great aunt she was a source of unconditional love and hope and positivity for lots of things. My great uncle was not that guy. He was a very stern man. He was a very serious man. But in his eyes, the differences between his upbringing and the modern day, especially because he saw the transition during that really radical 60s period.
He was an adult. He was an adult reading the newspapers.
He was in his 40s by then, late 30s or early 40s by then. And he would say, he was like, the hoods got put away, but that doesn't mean the people changed. The same people who made the laws that made that happen were still in power. Just, they were like, oh, we're nice now. He's like, are you really going to believe that? I'm like, no. It was a perfect example, one of the life lessons he gave me. When I was about 7, he called me and he said, boy, and I literally thought my name was Boy until I was almost 12. He said, boy, come on in here and sit on my lap. I was like, all right, whatever. That's what you want. I came in and sat on his lap. He pushed me off on the floor. I said, what did you do that for? He's like, don't trust anybody, boy. Not even you. Not even me. I said, okay. I forgot about it. A week later, he calls me in. He says, hey, boy, come on here. I need to give you allowance. Come sit on my lap. I was like, ooh, allowance. I ran in, sat on his lap. He pushed me off on the floor. He's like, didn't I tell you not to trust nobody? And then about 10 days later, he calls me and is like, what's with this report card? Boy, come on here and sit on my lap. I'm like, I'll stand. He was like, now you're learning. And that was one of the most central lessons that I remember taking from him. So I would say he didn't speak French, but he would say, plus le change, plus le même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And our current presidential administration would definitely be testament to his thoughts there.
Can I ask you a little bit more about this topic? I'm Canadian. And
sure.
I've been traveling a lot to the States. And there's
I'm sorry.
No, I love the United States. I love the U.S. I love the U.S. people. But I'll tell you something. There's a difference between Black people who live in Toronto. I don't know if that's the right word. Some people get mad at me when I say that, but
you're right.
That's not uncommon to say that in Toronto. But they're not African Americans. They're of Caribbean or African descent. Okay, so they're not. It's a different culture. That's a better way to put it. It's actually, and I think that a lot of people in Toronto think that the Caribbean Toronto culture is the same as African American culture. And I think one of the reasons why Kawhi Leonard left the Toronto Raptors and a lot of basketball players don't like Toronto is because their culture is not present there. Is that a fair statement?
It is fair, and it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm writing a project right now called Lion of Judah with Bob Marley's family, where we talk a lot about the what they call the Maroons of Nova Scotia, the first time
Sure.
that
Yeah.
a large African group was brought to Canada, and the there was a greater focus on the programming, especially because of the larger numbers of African people here. There was a focus on programming away from the cultures that had gone before. So the things that we were used to in African cultures, the things that you'll find in Jamaica, the things that you'll find even in Caribbean cultures, in England and in Paris that I've gone to now, and so on and so forth, are much closer to what you would see in an African culture, because I was able to visit Ghana and I was able to visit Nigeria and a couple places like that too, than you would see here, because there's been less effort put into stripping away that cultural underpinning.
Mm.
If somebody from Jamaica comes to the United States, they're going to have a very different cultural framework, because they're going to have a history of rebellion. They're going to have a history of, we stood up against the Spanish, we stood up against the English for 83 years of guerrilla warfare.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, when in Canada, for example, when they were like, when they tricked the Maroons and shipped them to Nova Scotia, they immediately started rebelling, and they were so intent about it, and there was not the same kind of societal pressure to purge that sense of them, that it was ultimately just easier to, like, look, we'll just send you back to Sierra Leone. It's fine. It's
Yeah.
fine. That is a drastic difference in what happened here. You will see, if you've seen films like 12 Years a Slave or Roots, the specific things that were done to Africans in the United States to deprogram, dehumanize, and change the way that they think about things. More recent scientists have talked about the inheritance of that sort of thing that can even be passed down through DNA, even if you didn't experience it, that you can see the trauma that happened generations back to people.
Sure.
In people's DNA markers now. So yeah, it is a difference. For me, I know one of my friends, Frank Williams, was an editor at The Source. He lived in Toronto for a number of years. Loved it in Toronto. It's too freaking cold for him though,
Sure.
and he's from New York. So
Sure.
for me, that's I had a conversation at the Comic-Con where this one friend of mine says, "You're too smart to live in America. You need to come live in Canada. Your kids are going to go to college for free. There's going to be medicine." I'm like, all right, I hear your arguments, and they're valid arguments, but what was the temperature at your house on December 12th?
Sure.
He was like, it was like 5-6 degrees. I'm like, it was 71 degrees at my house.
Sure.
I'm not going anywhere.
Weather matters, man, for sure. It definitely is a factor. People in Minnesota have the same issue. It's freezing in Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
So
my family's all from Detroit and Wisconsin, so I've had my share of snow for my life. Yeah.
does your poetry reflect any of the struggle, the ongoing struggle of the civil rights movement today? And are we making progress on that front, or are we in a sense becoming more segregated in ways, but using Facebook and these digital tools?
Again, I would say, why not both?
Sure.
My poetry definitely reflects the struggle for freedom, for self-determination, for all people to be able to play on a level field. There's no significant advantage that I'm seeking over anybody else. Um, there's no, I'm not looking for something I don't feel that is owed or what have you. But in that, we have polarized greatly as a society, both due to influences from within and from without. When you have lobbyists like the Koch brothers, who have spent millions of dollars making sure that education gets weakened in Kansas and Oklahoma and so on and so forth, that changes the electorate, that changes the people who are elected, therefore it changes the laws. Likewise, when you see the evidence of the Russian bot farms who spend all day trying to influence American opinion through social media, which is a weaponizing of information, which is brand new to this century. We've never seen anything like that before. These sorts of things.
Yeah,
are
it goes
affecting-
way beyond reverse propaganda. Like the reverse
Yes,
propaganda that we had in the 60s and 70s with Russia, and that now it's sophisticated, it's indistinguishable from news in a way, or whatever it is. Sorry,
It's
I interrupted you.
insidious.
It is insidious.
Absolutely.
It really is, because it's changing the way people think.
Very much so. And that sort of, with the advent of social media, which does something to the dopamine receptors in our heads that I've got a notification. Check the notification. There's a little good feeling. Check the notification. Social media has that effect on people, at least according to the research that I've been able to see. And in doing so, if people get into these echo chambers, because our algorithms will guide you towards people who think like you think, then that will limit your ability to see other perspectives, to experience other things. The 2010 census said that more than 60% of the white people in the United States have no interaction with a person of color in an average week.
Yes, it's incredible how segregated it is in the United States. It really is. I was in Durham, North Carolina, or South Carolina. Mm-hmm. So I was in Durham, North Carolina, and where I was at the hotel, I mean, there was some African Americans that worked there and were going there and all that, but every single restaurant or club we went to was like 99% white people. Okay. And I'm a Canadian and from Toronto. So we don't have this kind of, like, Toronto is very mixed everywhere you go, especially downtown. There's people from everywhere in the world, Asian, Middle Eastern, African, American, Latino, everything. Everyone just mixes. It's mixed, much more mixed. Everyone mixes, but it's much more mixed. I went around this corner and we walked down the street and there was this nightclub. So let's go into that nightclub. I walk up to the front door. There's a bouncer at the front door. Happens to be an African-American guy. That's not odd to see at any club, right? You know, big guy in front of the bar. He's covering the bar. I'm like, hey, man, we're going to go in. It's me and my friend. He's also white. He's like, boy, you sure you want to go in there? I'm like, yeah, is it open? He's like, yeah. He had like I'm not going to try to imitate his accent, but he had like a real, anyway. So he said, well, okay, go in. We paid our $10. We walk in, and this has never happened to me before, okay? It's the first time this ever happened to me, but I'm sure it's happened to African Americans all the time. I walked into a room, and there was probably 300 black people and no white people.
Yep.
And it was like, for the first time in my life, I was like, whoa, I've never experienced this before, right? And like nobody really cared. Like we weren't noticed, or like they didn't really give a crap. They're partying, they're having fun, they're dancing, whatever. So what do you do when you get in that situation? My buddy looks at me and goes, what are you going to do? I said, we got to have a beer, man. We can't walk out of here. This is just too weird to walk out, right? To walk out. So we went in, we ended up talking to some people. We ended up having a great time and everything else. But we might have been the only white people to go into that bar.
True.
Like that's...
And more, yeah.
Like that's crazy to me.
More interestingly to me, because I've seen this sort of thing happen. In my neighborhood, growing up in Memphis, we would every once in a while we would see like some white people come through and they'd be lost. They wouldn't know where they were going.
Sure.
And my father would go out and he would say, well, he'd have his AAA maps that he loved to carry, and he would show them on the map. He's like, here's where you are, and here's where you need to go, and here's what you're going to run into, and here's what you'll see here. And they would go off on their way. And he wouldn't think anything of it. And he would come back in and he was like, if you're in a white neighborhood, don't ever do that. You'll get killed.
Or black neighborhood.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
He said, no. If I went into a white neighborhood, never do that. Never, ever do that. Because the exact same thing would more than likely lead. And there was a case in Michigan, actually, where there was a motorist who had been injured in a car wreck and went to knock on a door. The door opened and the guy, it was an African-American, knocked on the door. White guy opened the door, shot him with a shotgun. Like, didn't even look, didn't even interact. That, unfortunately, is not even a strange story to me. That's not even like the first time I've heard a story like that.
It's like the people are not individual human beings or something.
Very much so. There is it's
like you're black, you're white, and it's like that's what you are. You're not Hannibal Tabu. You're black.
That's what it is, and that's built into a lot of what has happened in the American character and the American, the United States. I don't want to say American because there's a lot more American than the United States, but the character of a lot of people in this country, because it's become so normal, so regular. The idea of, if I'm walking down the street, that I'm going to see purses get clutched and I'm going to see car doors get locked. And I'm like, I have a degree from USC. Like,
yeah.
I've been published. I've been published for like.
I'm not going to steal
years.
your purse,
Really?
lady. Yeah. Like
So, but I know this is the way the software is set up, and it is just software. It's just programming. And unless there's a radical reinstalling of the operating system, this is the software we're running.
I actually have a story similar to that one you told. I was in Overtown. I was in my North Miami Beach, and we were again. I was a sales rep, traveling salesman. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But we ended up getting lost, and we ended up in Overtown, Miami. I don't know if you know that.
Okay, I don't know specifically. No.
So it's like a ghetto in Miami, and the size of it blew my mind away. Like it was just block mile after mile of very poor area. Like
yep.
Like no grocery stores, no plaza with a big parking lot where everyone goes and you buy your stuff. It was just it was like an urban wasteland. No schools, like we were lost. So we're driving, we're trying to find our way out of there. It just went on forever. How enormous this depressed area was in comparison. And then we're driving, and this is what's interesting. I'm going to make this point to you, and you see what you think about this. We're driving along, and all of a sudden, whoop whoop, the cop comes behind us. Okay, and an African American police officer gets out of his car. He walks up to our car. Roll down the window. I'm like, "Oh, were we speeding, officer? We're Canucks. We're Canadians. We don't have an antagonistic relationship with the police." You understand what I mean? I'm used to the police. Oh yes. My experience of police is always friendly, and they're always giving me tickets for speeding. Here you go, son. Slow down. Listen, you're going too fast. It's a 100. That's a 60-mile-per-hour area. You were doing 85 in the 60s on there. But here you go. My interactions with police are never like suspicious or I'm a criminal or anything like that. And so he goes like this. He's like, son, what the hell are you doing here? We're lost, sir. Yeah, you need to get the hell out of here now before it gets dark. I'm like, okay. So he's like, yeah, you're going to go over there. You see that road there? You're going to make a left. There's going to be an on-ramp on your right. And when you get on that highway, you're going to drive for whatever and get out of here. This is not, a safe place. And he was concerned for our safety.
Yep.
Because we were white.
Yes. That checks out.
You understand what I'm like? He wasn't mean to us or racist or anything like that. He was just like, I don't want to be picking up your body off somewhere here later on or something like that.
He didn't want to do the paperwork.
Yeah. There you go. Is it that dangerous? Like, is it really, are those areas really that?
Well, here's the thing.
I know South Chicago is basically a war zone. That's a different one, but.
Well, my brother-in-law DJs there all the time. And it's interesting because my sister's black and my brother-in-law is white. And he's like one of the best-known urban DJs in the area, and he has no problems there. But there can be a situational, accidental things that happen. For example, I went to USC, and the neighborhood around USC is not so great. And there was a couple of Asian students who were sitting in a brand new BMW with the door open, playing really loud music, waiting for one of their friends to come out of a house at 3:00 in the morning. Now, when I heard the start of this, I'm like, this is not going to end well.
Right.
And subsequently, it did not, because somebody came along who lived in the neighborhood, didn't like the music they were playing, didn't like the attitude. They were like, yeah, and didn't show what probably seemed to the person who lived there like the right amount of respect. And they're both dead now. Now, was that necessary? No, of course not. But when you put a lot of firearms, just willy-nilly around places, they tend to be used. If they were worried for your safety, one, like I said, he definitely did not want to do the paperwork from you guys getting murdered.
Sure.
Second, he figured very quickly that you two were not either A, looking for drugs, or B, looking for prostitutes. You were not there for some illicit purpose.
Sure.
So he was like, the easiest thing for me to do is to get these guys the heck out of my jurisdiction so I can deal with whatever actual problems I'm going to have to deal with tonight.
Sure. Yes.
And that's I mean, that's not an unfair perspective to have.
Mm.
If you said, for example, oh, we're down here looking for this amazing soul food restaurant that we were told about, blah, blah, he's like, okay. But
Yeah.
but that's not what you said. He was like, your goal is to be safe, and I'm going to get you to safety because that's less paperwork for me.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
sure.
have to record this. I'm going to have to move on with my life, and I'm never
Yeah.
going to have to
I
think
gotta
about this
go.
again.
I gotta get home to my wife later on. I'm not dealing with overtime with you two lost Canucks here in Overtown. Get the hell out of here, boy. So let me ask you, just on this path, maybe one more question about this, and then we'll move
Sure.
on to some of your fiction, and maybe we'll get lost in it again. You talked
Mhm.
about an operating system. That's an interesting.
Yes.
That's an interesting way to, or an interesting simile or metaphor for, um, the zeitgeist of human interactions, or
Hmm.
the paradigms in which we view the world,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Have you thought much about this operating system? Have you written about it? Is it something that is it your pièce de resistance that you're going to come out and say, this is what we need to do? Tell me a little bit about that operating system, if it's something that you've thought about a lot.
It is something I've thought about quite a bit. There's and this will actually segue into the writing. That there is there has been, at least according to my admittedly limited studies of history, a cultural shift towards imperialism, towards colonialism, towards the destruction of things for profit, towards the needs of the few, be they a kleptocracy or what have you, outweighing the needs of the many, which is virtually everybody else, and that has reinforced and re-entrenched itself in lots of things. The reason why, for example, a lot of popular culture is focused around, oh, Scarface or these bad guys. It's like the bad guys win and they don't face consequences. And we see that all the time. So these are fairly logical themes that happen. This factored into my own work in a set of books that I'm loosely calling The Context, which I've written 2 novels in it so far, where the basic idea is that humanity is essentially become, I'm sorry, how did I phrase it? I said, no, carbon-based life is a sexually transmitted disease. And it is not necessarily a cure, but it can be controlled. That when humanity spreads out throughout the galaxy, the galaxy is like, ew, humanity, cooties. So
That's an
there needs,
interesting way to look at it, actually. That's really interesting, that to say, what's the difference between, like, every life form, in a sense, interacts with its environment in a way to make its environment more conducive, like immediately conducive to its current needs, right?
Mhm.
And like, one of the signs of intelligence is to be able to, one of the things that makes us conscious and human, and maybe is the spark of God or whatever belief system you have, is that us
Mhm.
humans have the ability to contemplate the future, right? We have the ability to look down the road, if we're taught and raised right, look down the road and worry about future Hannibal, because that's
Mm.
going to be me one day.
I use that phrase a lot. That's funny you said that.
Like, future Hannibal is you. You're just not there yet,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
how do you want to treat that guy? Do you want him to
Hmm.
exercise on a regular basis and get enough sleep and be healthy? Or do you want him to have cirrhosis of the liver and be dying of lung cancer because he smoked all the way up to that, right? So
All
there's like
bad.
that. We have the ability to conceptualize this. And it's interesting to consider, like, human life as a virus, because if we did go to other, like what we would call pristine Earths that don't have
Hmm.
us there, it would be like a disease on that place. It just depends on how you look at the perspective, right?
Hmm.
And you could actually look at like the movement of human peoples around the
Hmm.
world as an infection in a way.
Very much so, especially when you see the difference between cultures that would move into a place and then live in harmony with the environment, or cultures that would move into the place and build a Starbucks.
Mm.
Oh, and bulldoze down the natural. One of my favorite stories, this actress Jennifer Lawrence was in Hawaii filming something, and she had an itch, and she started rubbing against a rock formation, and they're like, ma'am, this is a sacred place for the people here. This is been so, and she's like, oh, really? And starts rubbing her butt on it and laughing. That's the opposite of looking at the future.
Sure.
That's a very short-sighted perspective that has become all too common in the, as you say, the zeitgeist, in the operating system. It's built
Sure.
into the kernel now. So it's possible to do software patches, and you may be, oh, let me install this different app to try to
We're
get
going to do a
tolerances.
workaround. We're going to do a workaround. You know, yeah.
Still, the operating system remains what it is. Western culture remains the way it has been crafted since before the Roman Empire.
I know. I think it's changed into something. I think it's changed, and I mean, we can there's all sorts of issues, and in order to make this argument, I'm going to have to set aside issues like civil rights, and that's a huge issue. But and slavery and other issues.
Tough to do.
And treatment of First Nations and that in Canada. And we're just going to set those issues aside. But if we say that I think what our culture has evolved to now is the creation of individual egotistical narcissists. And so when you encounter an egotistical narcissist, like say Donald Trump would be a perfect example.
It would come up
of an overt egotistical narcissist. Now, whether or not you agree with his policies or you're a Republican or a Democrat, I have no idea. Okay.
I do not agree.
Okay. So, but regardless to all that, that's what he is, whether you like him or not. And what's happening in the United States is when you encounter someone who's a narcissist, what happens is you only have two options with them. You either validate their egotistical narcissism or you go into conflict with them. There's no nuance in between, right? So you validate. So half of America is in this weird ego validation with Donald Trump, and half of America is in conflict with Donald Trump. And
true.
On both sides I think both sides, not you particularly, but the people that are refusing to engage in political compromise, the people that are name calling and excluding and refusing to come to the table to discuss import duties on carrots or whatever, like some basic issue the United States is facing as a country, are both deeply egotistical. And I think that's what our society with Facebook and computers and pop culture and the Kardashians and all these rubbing your butt on a rock because you're just going, oh, it's sacred, I'm going to twerk on it. You know, this that is such a disgusting portrayal or it's a disgusting example of somebody's ego completely out of control.
Agreed.
No? It's like your ego is crazy to do that. Like if somebody tells you something sacred, you immediately should respect it. You don't have to care. You don't have to care whether about the meaning of it. You don't have to get into the rock, but you have to respect it. Come on. That's ridiculous.
I totally agree. Yeah. And when you add back in the things that you took out, when you add in the murder and the slavery and the bloodshed and all that, blah, 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 then you look at a software that is corrupt at the root, a software that has flaws that go back into the legacy code, not just the newer versions, but if you look into the older versions of the code, oh wait, no, these flaws have been here for a while. We haven't programmed these out. We haven't done anything to program these things out. And that can, well, like I said, it creates not only these two sides, the ego validation and the one struggling against it, but there is another perspective, the likes of which you'll get. I remember a columnist named Dr. Ron Daniels said the goal was to become ungovernable, to step so far outside of the system that its effects were irrelevant to you. That goal is hindered by the conflict-seeking nature of the current administration and their sorts of things. So, for example, my kids, I've got two kids. They're 9 and 15, right? And one of the things that is being affected by, say, for instance, Betsy DeVos in the Department of Education is changes to how their education is going to be happening, changes to how the education of the children around them are going to be receiving. And that affects their life in a way that they may have wanted to be like, look, I don't know what y'all crazy people are doing. I don't want to be a part of it. But this starts to draw people into a fight where they didn't even want to fight.
Yeah.
That polarization creates conflict, where conflict did not exist. And that
And over issues that are not even something, how could you be polarized over a particular issue? Like people, if you have something like education and two people care about children and they sit down at a table, they can cut a deal, dude.
If they both care.
Or no, but if they're not captured by special interest groups and whatever. I want to ask you something jumped up at me just in while we were talking and you know, so I've read a lot about chattel slavery. Okay. So when people say everyone's descended from slaves, there's a difference between the type of slavery that Brazil and America and Jamaica and in Haiti that happened, and then what happened to slaves in, let's say, the Roman Empire, or if you were a slave. If you were like a Roman Empire slaves, was like an indentured servitude, and I'm sure they were brutal too in some ways. Some of them were treated very brutally, but it wasn't the same. You were talking about this idea, and the idea was that you take people from one continent, you completely dehumanize them and rob them of all their cultural affinities, all their archetypes, all their stories, all their idea of greatness. You Buffalo Soldier them into a foreign land in a way, and you treat them like no different than you treat your livestock. You sell them on platforms and bid on them as if they are as assets. And this ends, and then the Jim Crow law comes in, and then are you saying that like the operating system is still recovering or still recovering from this chattel slavery in the United States?
There was a great video that went around on Facebook that talked about the difference between, say, for instance, two virtually identical individuals. One is a black kid named Jamal who lives in maybe Overtown or whatever, and one is a white kid named, I think, Dave, that was like living in Woodland Hills or whatever. And let's say that they both have the identical IQ, identical test scores, identical everything, but if Jamal is in a crappy school that has a crappy library and crappy resources, he's going to have a harder time applying for things than, say, Dave would. If Jamal can't afford the fees for applications for, like, the USC fee was, I think, like when I applied, it was like $40, but I got a fee waiver because my school was good enough that I knew about fee waivers. Most of my friends who went to other schools were like, "What's a fee waiver?" And they ended up at community colleges. That's a difference in what happened to them, a difference in access, a difference in opportunity. And when you factor in that old software that spent all these years saying that these people were assets, that people like me were assets, spent all these years beyond that legally saying that they were second-class citizens, that they were not as good, that they were taken, and that they were not held in as high a regard as a different sort of people based upon the color of their skin. And then all of a sudden, okay, just kidding, I guess you guys are equal. But didn't take away any of the negative effects of all of that. Didn't give them any of the advantages of, inherited wealth, of inherited culture, of inherited ability to see themselves in a good light. That, another perfect line. A rapper named Razcast has a line that says, "The diameter of your knowledge is the circumference of your activity." So if all you know is Overtown, then you're not going very far from Overtown. You're not. Most of the people I went to school with in Memphis are still in Memphis. They're in crappy jobs, doing crappy things in Memphis because they saw Star Wars as, oh, that's a cute movie. I need to go back and, figure out what we're going to do. Whereas I saw it, I was like, I need to get the heck out of here. I need to figure something else out.
You know what's funny is that I lived in Belfast, Northern Ireland for a year. And
that's tough.
You know what, man? It was like I kind of blended in there. I wasn't noticed very often because I have that heritage is in me of those people. So I just kind of blended in. But there's Protestants and Catholics there. Like in terms of walking down the street, nobody noticed me, dude.
Right.
And there's Protestants and Catholics, and then there's Protestant and Catholic areas. Right now, this is what's interesting. These people are ethnically the same people. There's no racial differences between. I mean, maybe one descends from Scotland, and they're all from Scotland and Ireland anyway. So whatever, they all have a shared ethnic heritage. The difference is religion. Okay, so one's Protestant, one's Catholic. They're not even that practicing. I mean, when I lived in Belfast, in 1996, 97, I felt like it was a Dr. Seuss book about the south-going Zacks and the north-going Zacks. Like, I talk to these people, and it'd be like, What the hell are you talking about? You hate Catholics. What are you talking about? Like this is like like Belfast is like a human example of a Dr. Seuss story. You know, the Sneetches with the S on the beaches. You know, I have the star-bellied Sneetches. I am thars, the stars upon thars, and all this. We have star-belly Sneetches. Right? It's like we make up these labels. Like it's a perfect example. You know what I told all those people? I said, you know what you need to do? You need to get the hell out of Belfast, buddy, and go somewhere and realize that nobody cares about this bullshit, Dr. Seuss crap. You guys are running around Starbelly Sneetches shit. You know, it's crazy. No, it's complete.
It is.
Belfast is completely crazy. Now, but in America, you have these visible differences. Okay, and it's in Canada too. There's racism in Canada too. Canada's not a utopian place of equality. I certainly think it's a lot more integrated and better, particularly the city of Toronto. But, you know, you have these visible differences. Is America able, and are we in the West, are we able to get over what we see in a sense and the labels that have been put into us and the messages that have been put into us?
I believe, as Warren Ellis wrote, that the future is inherently a good thing and that the possibility is absolutely there. Absolutely. Now, whether the motivation is there, that's a completely different story. It is totally possible for people to change if they want to. Anybody can do most of the things they want to do if they're willing to put the work in for it. Putting that work in for it is not a common desire. It is not. And while that possibility exists, there is a greater societal reward in not doing it. Basically, the tribalization of the United States into red states and blue states, and the idea of some of them being red, given the struggles of the 1980s with Ronald Reagan fighting against the Soviets, is very funny to me. But that tribalization is not only rewarded, but is reinforced by, you know, the arguing heads on the television and the gerrymandering of your district. So, you're all together, so we're going to make you all together, so you vote for this way, and that will make sure that you've got these people in Congress and so on and so forth. All this is like I said, it's all in the operating system. It's a software flaw, and you know, either you're going to have to let's wipe the drive and start the code from scratch in a way, which is an enormous amount of work.
Are you calling for a new republic?
I believe in many ways I'm calling for a new species, because this is not looking really, when I see, there's a story that came out of Florida that I saw recently where a woman was shoplifting and she was caught, and she started running from the security guards or whatever, and reached into her pants and pulled out actual feces to fling at them that was already there, that was already in her pants, and apparently part of her strategy. I'm like, yep, this humanity thing, it is not working out. I don't know about it. It's not going so well. May just have to call it today. I don't know.
I thought you said the future is inherently positive or inherently a good thing.
The future is, but the people here are not in the future.
Okay, so you know what's interesting?
Weird.
You said that humans will change, right? I actually have a bit of a theory.
They can change.
Right.
I said they will change.
No, they can change. People will change when the benefits of change are completely obvious, and when the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change.
Absolutely.
So the benefits need to be obvious, and also the pain of staying the same needs to still be more. So if the pain is not more, if the benefits are obvious, that doesn't mean people will change. You need the counteracting force of the pain of staying the same. And I mean, that's the polarity. That's Dr. Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X, right? They're like two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. You can't have Adolf Hitler without Winston Churchill. They're like the arch enemy. They're representing the polarity of the human species. Are you saying that the benefits of change for white Americans aren't obvious enough, and that the pain isn't enough? Or what is it that you're saying? Why aren't people
I'm
changing?
absolutely, I'm absolutely saying both of those things. That and this is interesting. Once I saw more once I got to travel internationally overseas, that the dichotomal thought patterns of the West, the either or structure of most of our binary kind of thinking, is alien to literally billions of people around the world. That they have more of a both and situation of things. It's like we don't have to divide. We can see both of these things simultaneously. We can contain multitudes. And this, the first thing, this dichotomal thought pattern, this oppositional system that works from our legal system to our cable news debates to even the online struggles of what do you mean the Hulk could be Superman? Superman can fly. Those sorts of things. These are all very conflict based. They are based in conflict, which comes from a different cultural paradigm. It comes from a cultural paradigm of what the West, like I said, at least since the Roman Empire, has created about conquest, about the right of might, about swords over reason in many ways, and that's unfortunate. So yeah, absolutely, the pain is nowhere near bad enough. If this Epstein guy could get through all those, he missed some like 34 sex offender check-ins, and we're busy with stop and frisk. We're the New York Police Department. We don't have time for you.
Yeah.
And that's New York, the bluest of blue states.
Sure.
If that's that, then yeah, the pain is nowhere near bad enough, and the benefits are definitely not clear enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that what Martin Luther King did and what change makers do, regardless as to where they are, whether it's in Northern Ireland or South Africa or anywhere, Gandhi in India, is there seems to be the introduction of change through pain, but they did it in a way that was peaceful. Like those people took the peaceful path, right? I mean, they tried to blow up the guy's house, Dr. Martin Luther King. Somebody tried to blow up his house
multiple times, and he was assassinated.
Assassinated.
In Memphis, where I grew up.
Yeah, I mean, the Redeemer is he who has died and is reborn. But I mean, like you think about, he knew that too. He knew that they would probably try to kill him, dude.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's Christ-like, man. That's what Christ did. That's the story of Jesus Christ.
And it's a remarkable. It's more heroic than I could ever be, and I will definitely admit that. But I look at statistically the examples of history where change happened are much more like Bastille Day. They're much more like, well, we see you with the cake and the dresses, and we're just going to murder everybody that's in the
class. For sure.
We're
that
just
was crazy.
Start on. We're just gonna that was a time when they're like, yeah, this operating system is gone. We're switching over.
It's interesting. I asked you if you think you want a new republic because I was in France in June. Long story there, but there was. Have you heard of these gilets jaunes, the yellow vests? It's like a movement in France. It's a movement in France.
I don't know if I have. No.
Okay, so it's like a.
I was there in December, and I didn't remember it.
So we were in Bordeaux, and the hotel, there was this expensive hotel we were staying at. We're like, this is really cheap or whatever. It turns out that there was a Gilets jaunes protest scheduled for, that the day that we were checking in. And what was interesting was that I didn't know this, but 4 months before it, the Gilets jaunes had trashed the lobby of that hotel. Now, I'm from Toronto. I mean, we've had one protest when the G20 was in that got a little out of hand, but mostly Toronto's a pretty safe, peaceful place. When people protest, they sit around and they hang out. They hold signs. They don't smash anything. You know what I mean?
If it didn't snow, I would move there.
It's pretty cool. Like, and you'll have like a protest of whatever, be mixed crowd or this crowd or whatever. Usually things are pretty peaceful. Anyway, so these guys started marching, and there was literally French military in front of our hotel with assault rifles.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, so I jump out. First thing I do is I got to talk to one of these cats. So I run out. You know me. You already know me. I like to talk, right? So I'm like, hey, man, you speak English? No. Hey, man, you speak English? Finally, I found this guy who speaks English. And so France right now, he told me, is in the Fifth Republic. So it's been refounded 5 times since the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And he said, we want a new republic. And I said, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? He goes, we want to take down all of the institutions and everything that runs everything, and we want to reform it under something different. But that's very dangerous, man. You saw what happened in the French Revolution, right? Like, this is to take down all those institutions, the things that we've built our America upon. You're going to take them all down and reform them. Can anyone even handle this, man? This is crazy.
Well, I would look at that and say Christopher DeAndre Mitchell would handle it. Mike Brown would handle it. Ezel Ford would handle it. Look, there's danger already. There's plenty of people dying already. There's a line. One of my friends was from South Africa, and he said after the changeover in apartheid, people were asking him, "Oh, is it so different?" He was like, "It didn't matter to me in the township whether or not the boot in my neck had a black foot inside or a white foot inside. There was a boot on my neck." So under those circumstances, whatever, if you're telling me that there's danger to the system changing, there's danger to the system staying the way it is. Because, there was a 17-year-old girl killed on the 91 freeway Sunday night, by police for having an accident. She was getting out of her car and they thought they saw a handgun, so they shot her. She was 17.
America has way too many guns, dude. It just... Yeah. Okay, so...
And state checks.
You want to know the difference between Canada and America? I'll sum it up for you. Okay? In Canada, everyone has the right to health care. In America, everybody has the right to own guns.
That checks out.
Right? So in Canada, you have the right to health care and you have to have a license to own a gun. In America, you have the right to have a gun, but you have the opportunity to get health care if you have enough money. That's a major difference, soon.
That checks out. I can't argue that at all.
But I mean, how come America, I'm not talking, I know the right to bear arms is really against the government. It's not against each other. It's like this going back to the founding fathers and all this sort of stuff. But it's just so obvious that people are shooting each other so much in the United States. Like police shooting people. I mean, there was a guy who got in a van 2-3 summers ago and drove down a Toronto street, killing women, running over women in this van. It was a horrible incident. But know, the cops didn't shoot him. They arrested him. In the United States, that guy's dead for sure.
Oh, well, it depends. There was a story in Texas about a biker gang that was doing some rowdy stuff, and the police were called, like 4 or 5 police cars were called out to deal with it. And the bikers started getting into a fight with the cops. And 2 of the bikers pulled guns and shot at the cops. But all of them were captured alive. The police did not fire a single shot in Texas, which is the shootingest possible of American states. However, conversely, in almost the same county, Sandra Bland, was jailed and suspiciously died in her cell, and no investigation happened. Sure, whatever. Those are operating system problems.
But why? Like you'll hear about a guy in the States in that Ferguson, Missouri, or whatever. Oh yeah, the cops shot him out of self-defense 14 times. Like what?
Several times.
You unloaded your pistol into his back out of self-defense. That's it. That's crazy.
In the words of John Cougar Mellencamp, ain't that America for you and me? Ain't that America? It's something to see, baby.
Yeah, I mean, I listen. There's lots of wonderful things about America, and America is a great force for good in the world, and there's lots of positive things about it. But the gun stuff just seems to me to be like something that you guys got to get a grip on, man. It's out of control.
There are challenges, and if, as you say, if a new republic would do the trick, then I'm all for it.
Tell me about some of your books. Did you ghostwrite these, or are these published under Hannibal Tabu?
I've done everything under my name. Well, hang on. No, I didn't do it. No, that didn't actually come out. So yeah, everything's under my name.
Okay. So The Crown, Ascension, and Faraway, and then
Far Away.
Far Away. Sorry, I'm reading quickly here. And then Rogue Nation.
No
what are these fiction books, and what are they about?
Yeah, those 3 books in particular are about this fictional continuity of mine called The Context, where it starts in, I don't even remember where. Oh, yeah. The Crown starts 8,500 years ago and goes, the final book in the series, whenever I finish writing it, is supposed to be 150,000 years in the future. And it's an alternate take on the development of humankind and their expansion into the stars, which has a lot of magical realism woven into it, which has a lot of traditional beliefs of indigenous peoples from around the world woven into it, and has, as I said, just a different perspective on that a lot of times you wouldn't see in science fiction or speculative fiction. And in doing so, it's got one central character there's a character who was born as an immortal. She just won't die, and she's a central figure through a lot of this story and plays through a lot of it. And watching her development and coming into understanding of why is she like this way? Why did she happen? What is her goal? What is her purpose? Is one of the through lines of the books that my wife is always like, stop talking about what's going to happen. I'm like, sorry. But that is a large part of what's happening. So with The Crown Ascension, it's an introduction of her and her story and what happens with her, because while she's immortal, she's basically just, a little bit durable and a little bit strong. Anybody who she falls in love with, they can fly. They're immeasurably strong. They're immune to any form of terrestrial damage. Her love literally can make them superhuman, as long as she's in love with them. The second she's not, all gone. And this development of this story and some of her old business from her time in ancient Egypt is a lot of the focus of that first book. Far Away changes the scene to, it's a science fiction prison novel set in the world's most secure prison. And the only problem with it is a person who's a born and bred revolutionary who's spent his entire life trying to get in there, and what he's planning to do once he gets in there. So that's a really kind of a pot boiler, and it just keeps turning up the heat till. But and then Rogue Nation is a science fiction political thriller set in Rwanda that I had to do a lot of research for, and that I started out with the idea of, I wanted to make this really central, this galvanizing character who was a little bit Doctor Doom, a little bit Idi Amin, and a little bit Kingpin from Marvel Comics. And this character is just like, he's a force of nature, and when he just moves through things, he can't be stopped. And it came from I was reading a book called Wildcats 3.0 from Wildstorm, which said what would happen if there was a corporation that was a superhero. So I decided to take that a step further and said, what would happen if there was a country that was a supervillain? And that's the nature of that book.
Rogue
and
Nation.
It's so much fun. It's so much fun. And I've been sitting on the manuscript for that one. That's the only, because I did a preview chapter of it in, was it Far Away? Yeah, I did a preview chapter of it in Far Away to tease it. And I've been sitting on the manuscript forever. And my wife's like, you got to finish this. You got to finish this. You got to finish this. So my goal is hopefully to get it out in early 2020. That is my goal, to hopefully have that last. Well, it's not the last book in the series. It's the third book in the series, third of 6. But I'll hopefully get it out in 2020. And then I won't George R.R. Martin the whole thing and never finish the series.
Are these stories going on in your head? Like, are you
all
playing
the time?
Right, so you'd be sitting there, like, driving along, and you'll be thinking about the story of the girl and how she's interacting in ancient Egypt. How do you decide which stories go in the book and which ones don't? Because I'm sure there's just things going in your head. Or am I wrong about that?
So many.
Do all the stories go?
No, you're totally right. My whole life is like stories inside of my head trying to push their way out. There. With this, one of the best keys that I have is outlining. So there is a timeline document that I keep on my. It's synchronized between my phone, my computer, and my tablet, and so on and so forth. So wherever I am, I can just crack it open and start going at it. And this timeline document covers every important date in that entire 150,000 plus year thing. And every time I get an idea, that's got to go on the timeline. It's got to go on the timeline. And then when I'm getting ready to put something together, for example, Rogue Nation is something that's set. I'm trying to not spoil this. That I needed to tell this story in order to establish something that will happen in another story.
Right. Basically. So you're interweaving something.
Yes, very much so. So I had referred to something in Far Away that has something to do with something that happened in Rogue Nation, and I had set something up in. I started the sequel to The Crown, which is The Crown: Rise and Fall, which also was relevant to stuff that happened in Far Away and in Rogue Nation. But I need, for continuity purposes, to be able to have these things linked together, which is why the timeline is so important, so I don't screw things up. So when I look at the timeline, I'm like, okay, I need to pull this part out because this part is a story. This part is a short story. This part is a novel. This part is a this. And then I'll get to going on those when I'm not working on work for hire, which is eating up a lot more of my time recently.
You never met a check you didn't. You never met a check you didn't like, right? Or whatever.
That part.
Sam Jackson.
I'm like, did it clear? Then we good. So yeah, but these ideas are constantly, running in my head. And my wife, she's like, "Are you ever really here?" I'm like, "No, I'm here. I'm with you." She's like, "Are you for real though?" So, I have a constant and the problem with me, because I do so many things with reviewing comics and everything else, I'm not only running all my stories, I'm running the Star Wars continuity, I'm running the Marvel continuity, I'm running the DC continuity, I'm running 3 or 4 other things, Stranger Things, and those are constantly running in my head, keeping track of things. And on just the ones of my own, I'm like, all right, these I got to make new ideas. These got to have more stuff happening with them. And that's without the new ideas that pop up just out of nowhere, that like, oh, this is just a piece of flash fiction. This is literally just 500 words and I'll never think about it again. And yeah, it's just this constant, I never worry about people stealing my ideas because I've got lots more. I've never ever worried.
You know what? You know what's interesting? You don't want to give away the plot or spoil your book, but in a sense, like, there's no talker's block. There's writer's block. But there's no talker's block. You sit down and have a conversation with them, share some your ideas with someone you trust, and maybe you keep a couple of trade secrets, up your sleeve, and you don't tell everybody everything. But you got to be bouncing ideas off people. And that's why I do this show, because I really love to meet people like you and bounce ideas off them and listen to their perspective. Yeah, for sure. It's been an honor. And bounce, get the feel for their craft. Like, nobody can write Rogue Nation. Like, you have to, that's your book, right? But what you've laid out is such a wonderful artistic structure that for, a lot of people have these stories going in their head and they want to find a way to let them out. And it's like, I was listening to, it's like the timeline. That's exactly what you need. Because there's nothing better than when my daughter, or when I was a kid reading these books, or even as I don't read as many books now. I listen to Audible books, but there's nothing better than when I was reading C.S. Lewis or Lord of the Rings or one of these series, and a character that I met earlier in the book reappears. And you're like, I know that guy. And you kind of feel like it's like wonderful, man. And, in when Legolas appears in,
yes,
in what's the one with From Here and Back Again, the other Hobbit's guy's name there.
Not the Frodo, the Bilbo.
Frodo Baggins, not Frodo, Bilbo, the Bilbo Baggins one. And you're like, my kids are like, oh, that's him from that. I'm like, yeah, they appear, but you're supposed to read that one first. But anyway, doesn't matter. But yeah, and these characters reappear, and you feel like you're seeing an old friend again in your world of your dreams or something. It's like, oh, Legolas is back. That's just the one. But there's all these books, and people, they really like the dopamine reaction you get from Facebook, which is instant and tiny and small and meaningless, and probably a trick played on you to get your eyeballs looking at an advertisement.
Yep.
The dopamine rush you get from being reintroduced to the old love of your character's life from ancient Egypt, who got resurrected because whatever later, you know what I'm saying? Like, whatever creative, it's like, oh, I remember that guy, and you feel like you're meeting a friend again. And that's why fiction can be so wonderful that way. For the reader, and there's like almost like a conspiracy between the reader and the author on this, and the author is giving the reader what they want, right? Which is the entwining of these archetypal characters over a period of time, and the timeline is so useful for people, Hannibal, that you have that timeline, filling it in. Yeah, sorry.
It's great. There's no creator in the modern era who's been more profitable with this than Kevin Feige. Kevin Feige knows this inside and out. He's like, oh, you like Thor? Oh, well, let me show you when Thor's going to pop up again. Check this. Oh, no. You like Black Panther? Check this out. Here's what Black Panther's going to do next.
Yeah.
And the skill and the patience, because literally no one in entertainment has ever had that kind of patience on that kind of scale before, to weave a story into little chapters through decades. to billions of dollars worth of business is unprecedented. But he's literally just doing comic books on screen. That's literally what comic books do. The magic of continuity is what you're talking about. When Legolas pops up, that's continuity.
Yeah,
because
sure.
oh, well, I know he wrote an entire Elvish language. Tolkien created a whole freaking language just for this,
Crazy, eh?
just so he could, yeah, exactly. Just so he could build the underpinnings for this thing. And you don't need to know every word of
Yeah,
Elvish
not
to
only
know
a
that.
language, but he also did an alphabet too.
Exactly.
Crazy.
Everything. He was so thorough about it because he was a linguist by trade first.
Yeah.
And creating this modern myth means that you have to be able to weave things back in. That, oh, okay, I know in Norse myth, here's where Loki comes to take out Balder, but here's where he comes back to do this thing with the frost giants and help So there's a lot of different
Game of
elements to
Thrones does that
play.
too as well. Game of Thrones
Game
does
of
that
Thrones
really
is
well.
very good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they do that
because
well too.
that's a lot. I love what happened on the show. A lot of people are very polarized by that for some reason. But yeah,
That's because they care. That's because they really care. They actually.
You can only get mad if you care.
Yeah, it's like, I'll tell you, man, I bet you if you put those fMRI receptors on people's heads while they're watching some of these really good shows, I bet you they experience legitimate remorse and grief when one of the characters in the show dies. I bet you it's real. Maybe not as real, but it is real. They are invested, man, emotionally invested in those programs. For sure.
Absolutely.
Oh, those books. You know what I love about what you just said? I love the way we were talking so deeply about the writing process, and then you brought it back to money. I love it.
We are who we are,
I love it. But this guy makes a ton of money doing it, man.
Not to say, because the quality of the work stands up too. Because you can say, oh well, Batman versus Superman made $400 million, but wah.
Sure.
The quality of the work, the fact that I went to go see Black Panther in theaters 4 times, and the 4th time I'm still seeing grandmothers bringing their families and church groups coming in, and that's and that's only because of the quality of the work. If you didn't have a Ryan Coogler, if you didn't have a Taika Waititi, the guy who did Thor, I can't pronounce his name, which is embarrassing because I just saw him at the Marauder premiere. If you didn't have the quality of those types of craftsmen, people who have spent the time developing their craft, people who have worked at it, people who are good at it, and are willing to buy into a larger plan, then yeah, it doesn't work. Luckily, I'm the only guy on my timeline, so I ain't got to worry about who else. I'm like, yeah, I can figure that out. I'll get it done.
Yeah, but you've worked on other people's timelines. You've written on it. So it's interesting that your career is woven into so many different things, and behind it, there's some idea, an expression of your creativity, an expression of your desire a desire to make a mark in your world. And it's interesting because all the successful people I've met, a lot of them been doing this show, and just in a career as an entrepreneur, I always find when you start scratching their surface a little bit, whatever it is they're doing, if they're good at it, you usually find someone, like if they're creating beautiful things that they make money on. I'm not talking about Wall Street here, bro. You understand what I mean? Like I think there's a difference between an entrepreneur and a bankster. And I say bank, not banker, banksters. Okay,
I see where you're going.
But when I meet those people that have created something beautiful and they become very wealthy about it, and people say, "Oh yeah, they're usually very, very." All the ones I've met are very high in integrity. They're super creative. They know that if they want to make something meaningful, it needs to come with profit, and they're realistic about that approach. And I always find that, and I've also found that with you. It's like you're an artist in a sense, but you got a family to feed. You got goals in life, and that's so wonderful. It really is.
Thank you.
What else we got on here? I got to cover. Hang on. Let's see. Oh, it's a tough one. I don't want to leave anything behind. Is there anything else that you want to discuss about your career?
Well, I don't know when this will air because I'm getting ready to right now gear up to go to San Diego Comic-Con, which is the big nerdy gras thing of the year.
So comic book conference.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's San Diego Comic-Con International at San Diego. is considered the biggest pop culture and comic book celebration of the year.
Okay.
And people are real touchy about the name, so I'm trying to get it right.
Okay.
Most people just say, "Oh, it's SDCC." No, it's Comic Con International. But anyway, and that's a thing that I do. It's been good for me from a creative standpoint because I've met a lot of collaborators. I've gotten a lot of great ideas. I've been able to promote my work in a way that's been very good for sharing the work out there. But it's also been profitable. I was on a panel at WonderCon when this publisher saw me, and I ended up writing 22 books for him. Wonderman Comics. I did a historical fiction miniseries called Scoundrels, set in 1981 East Los Angeles. So much research. I did Irrational Numbers, which was a supernatural historical fiction book about vampires from ancient Greece to modern Romania. And, well, 1992 Romania, because I think I only went up to the revolution there. And then I wrote 12 issues of this time travel series called Time Core, which I got to do the most ridiculous possible things. I'm going to send them to attack the Berlin Conference in the late 1800s.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm going to send them to, I would just do these crazy, crazy things. And he was like, sure, go with it. I was
So it's like a what if story, a what if story.
And I kept trying to make sure that I stayed true to the characters, that I made the characters. So when something happened, you really had a feeling for why it was important. It was the stakes were always personal as well as grandiose. And that book was such a great experience with me. It's on issue. My second issue is out now because they're still drawing it. Time Core 13 is out right now from Wonderman Comics on digital booksellers. And it's a blast. I have so much fun on that book.
Are you a late night worker? Or are you an early morning worker, or when do you do your stuff?
I am a late night person, but having a family, that's hard because, I have to wake up with kids and drive them to school or whatever. So I've had to make a lot of alterations in what I do. I say a lot of time, every second I take for myself, I'm stealing from somebody else. So I was at a panel at Black Comics Arts Festival in San Francisco, and I was doing something, and I was talking in the video. I was like, and sometimes when things slow down at work, I'm gonna sneak off and write some comics. And people are like, "You're gonna get fired." I'm like, Misty knows, my boss knows. It's not. I've said it on multiple videos, and it's like she knows who I am. It was like, did it get done? Then she doesn't have any questions.
Sure.
So or my wife's like, "You've been in the bathroom for a while." I'm like, "What? Huh? Oh, okay, I'll be right out." So
yeah.
I have to sneak it, in the line at the supermarket, or if there's a lull in a meeting or something. I have to sneak into work wherever I can. I get a lot done on Saturdays when my kids are in dance class. But it's just it's important to me, so I have to force myself to find the time, and sometimes I have to take that time from other places. And I'm sorry, but in the words of John Carroll, a writer is kind of a holy sociopath. So you kind of should see it coming if you're dealing with a writer. It's like, you're gonna probably end up in a story. He's probably gonna be writing stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, there's no way to avoid it in a sense. There's no way to avoid it.
They're always here. Mm-hmm.
Is there like beneath these stories that we love, right? So there's like an archetypal foundation, right? That kind of runs through a lot of stories, like below it, like from Lord of the Rings to Black Panther. There's like this archetypal story that's running under it, and all they are is re-representations of the hero myth, or re-representations of a woman myth, a female hero myth, or male hero myth, or a family dynasty myth, or the tragedy. Like the Godfather movies are simply no different than any Greek tragedy in terms of the generations and the destruction and the family rises and falls. There's like a undertone. Do you have is that just coming in naturally to you, or are you thinking about that structure, that below structure of it?
Oh, I'm definitely thinking of it. I've read Joseph Campbell inside and out. I'm definitely, that's definitely part of the work. And a lot of what I do in that regard is both playing to and subverting it. Because one of the key teachings of my education when I went to USC was that endings have to be both surprising and inevitable. So there's somewhere I have to get. I know I have to get there. But if you know what it is before I get there, then it's not entertaining for you to read. The journey is not something you want to do. So with me, for example, when I'm trying to think of one that I can say. No, can't do that one. Well, No Far Away's been out long enough, I guess. I mean, it's not. Anyway, at the ending of Faraway, something happens that is messed up. It is messed up.
Okay.
And it had to happen. It's totally true to the characters. It's completely, but the stakes are really high. And when it happens, people are like, but does it have to, like, you knew what this was. You always knew what this had to be. And it goes off that way. And when I've talked to people about it, they'd be like, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, but were you mad? They're like, no, I wasn't mad. I mean, I saw why it had to happen, but I just couldn't believe that it happened. I was like, and that's really the sort of reaction that I'm looking for. That's really the way that it's trying to go, because if they're still emotionally affected by it, like you say, I mean, I'm 46 years old, right? And I'm wearing a Lando t-shirt, and and I can talk about the effect that Star Wars has had on my personal life.
Sure.
The many times parenting when my kids would be like, such as I tried to do, I'm like, do or do not. There is no try. The effect that's come out in everyday life to me. So if you can make a story where people care and it affects them, it will carry on. And that can have enormous financial rewards, but it can also have enormous personal rewards. I'll tell one last thing on this. I was at a mall at this art thing, and a kid is standing next to me. Couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. And I'm looking at me. I'm like, that's weird. Oh, well. And then the kid walks up to me and says, yeah, I've got heart. It beats disappointment it beats ice water through veins of corrugated disappointment. And I stopped because that was a line from a poem I'd written 12, 15 years before. And I'm like, what? She was like, you read that poem at this thing at the World Stage in Leimert Park, and my mom took me, and I remembered it. I was like, who? And then the mom comes up. She's like, oh my God, I remember, and they start talking to me about this poem and how this stuck with them for years and years and years. And these are people in my own community that I don't know. And that just hit me. I was like, she's 11, and that stuck with her. I mean, because when I read that, she would have had to been like 7 or 6 or something. So who remembers that? How does that happen? And that's
because what happened on that when you read that poem was both surprising and inevitable for her.
Exactly.
Right? You fulfilled some destiny, or you handed her some explanation of the universe, which she's used ever since your spirit encountered hers on the journey, right? It's kind of like that or something. Your art was impactful. That's so rewarding, Hannibal. I can't imagine that. That's incredibly rewarding to have that impact on people. We've been speaking for almost 90 minutes, and in the last week, I've done 2 3-hour podcasts, but I actually can't do it today. I'd love to keep going with you, Hannibal, and I'd love to have you on again.
I understand.
Where can people find your books and your poetry and your work?
All right. My website is HannibalTabu.com, HANNI, B as in bounce, AL, T as in tough, A, B as in bounce, U.com. I've had to spell it a lot. And I'm a part of a creative studio called the Operative Network, operative.net, where most weeks of the year we do free web comics. We just finished season 4 of Project Wildfire called The Once and Future King, and we'll be starting season 5, Project Wildfire, Smoke on the Water, this fall. I literally was scripting it last night when my wife was sleeping. And that's where people can find my work. I'm on social media at Hannibal Tabu on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, and Instagram. So I try to make myself easy to find.
Thank you for being a guest on the Get a Grip on Life podcast.
Thank you. This was fantastic.
If you're listening to this and wherever you're doing and you've thought about starting a podcast, you know what? If you're thinking about writing a book, man, you should be inspired by Hannibal Tabu. It was really, he really gave you a lot of gold there with his process and just letting you know that it's okay to think crazy stories in your head that are not true. Sometimes those are super awesome and they make great books. So do that. But if you want to start a podcast or you want to create some digital media, go to getagripstudios.com. Thank you for listening.